when God gets your attention. Good morning, my friends. You know, there's something about suffering that forces a person to listen. And it's not just suffering, it's disruption, it's chaos, it's tragedy. It's the unexpected catastrophe that shakes you out of your comfortable little narrative and makes you realize that reality is much, much bigger than you assumed. It's those moments when something or someone seems to be calling your name. Now, people don't like to think about that. We construct our lives so we don't have to. We surround ourselves with distractions, with trivial pursuits, with endless entertainment, with ideologies that conveniently remove responsibility from our shoulders. We pretend that we're self-sufficient, that we're in control, that we're the masters of our own existence. There's something about suffering that cuts through the noise of life. It's like a sharp and undeniable wake-up call, a force that strips away all the trivial distractions we so eagerly wrap ourselves in. When people are comfortable, when things are going well, they have a tendency to drift. They construct routines, habits, and ideologies that make them feel secure. They believe they understand the world, that their plans are solid, that their expectations are reasonable. And then suddenly something happens that shatters that illusion. Maybe it's a betrayal by someone you trusted. Maybe it's an illness that came out of nowhere. Maybe it's a financial disaster that leaves you reeling. Whatever form it takes, suffering has a way of forcing you into confrontation with reality. It's as if the structure of the universe itself is saying you're not paying attention. And the deeper the suffering, the harder that message is to ignore. People don't like to think about suffering as a teacher because it's a brutal one. It doesn't ask politely. It doesn't wait until you're ready. It demands your attention, and it does so with a force that makes it impossible to look away. That's part of the reason why suffering is so deeply tied to transformation in myths, religious traditions, and psychological development. The hero's journey, the death and rebirth motif, the dark night of the soul, these aren't just literary devices. They're representations of something deeply embedded in human experience. When a person is thrown into suffering, their first instinct is often to resist. They try to hold on to their previous assumptions about the world. They insist that things shouldn't be this way. But the more they fight, the worse it gets. The pain increases, the questions grow louder. And at some point, if they're honest, they realize that something fundamental has changed. That's when the real listening begins. Because in suffering, there is clarity. The unnecessary falls away. The mind sharpens. The heart grows more honest. People begin to see, often for the first time, what truly matters. They recognize the fragility of their own existence. They see the weaknesses in their character that they've long ignored. They confront truths that they previously pushed aside. And in that confrontation, something shifts. People like to believe they can shape reality according to their own desires. They construct narratives that justify their actions, ignore inconvenient truths, and assume that if they don't acknowledge a problem, it doesn't exist. But reality doesn't work that way. There are rules embedded in existence itself, moral, psychological, and practical rules. And when you violate them, there are consequences. It might not happen immediately. In fact, one of the most deceptive things about life is that you can ignore reality for a long time before it catches up with you. But it always does. So you see this in small ways every day. A person avoids a difficult conversation with their spouse, thinking that ignoring the tension will make it go away. But resentment builds, and one day the relationship collapses under the weight of unspoken words. Someone refuses to take responsibility for their health, brushing off warning signs, until they find themselves facing a crisis they could have prevented. A person convinces themselves that their dishonesty in business is harmless until the day their lies unravel and they lose everything. The longer a person avoids the truth, the heavier the cost becomes. It starts as discomfort, a small voice in the back of the mind saying, "This isn't right." If that voice is ignored, discomfort turns into unease, then into anxiety, then into outright suffering. The consequences compound over time, like interest on a debt that was never paid. And when the moment of reckoning comes, it often arrives in a way that feels overwhelming and inescapable. This isn't just an abstract idea. It's deeply woven into the way people experience life. The mind and body themselves seem structured to warn against avoiding necessary truths. Psychological distress often emerges when a person refuses to face what they need to face. Anxiety, depression, guilt, these aren't just random occurrences, they're signals, indicators that something is out of alignment. But modern life is filled with ways to numb these signals, distractions, addictions, ideological escapes. People drown out the warnings until they can't anymore. Reality is not something that can be manipulated indefinitely. It demands recognition. And when a person refuses to acknowledge it willingly, it forces itself upon them in ways that are often devastating. The longer they resist, the harder the impact. When a person finds themselves in crisis, they stand at a crossroads. One path leads deeper into despair, resentment, and destruction. The other, though far more difficult, leads toward transformation. But in that moment of crisis, when the weight of suffering is at its heaviest, it's not always clear which path they will take. The initial instinct is often to resist, to blame, to rage against the unfairness of it all. This is understandable. After all, no one willingly seeks out suffering. No one asks to have their world shattered. But suffering doesn't ask permission. It arrives unannounced, indifferent to whether or not you are prepared. When it does, the temptation to give in to bitterness is strong. It's easy to feel victimized, to believe that the world is cruel and meaningless, to use suffering as an excuse to abandon responsibility. And there is a certain logic to this. When people are in pain, they want to withdraw. They want to lash out. They want to justify their own self-destruction because in that moment, it feels like the only thing they can control. This is the path that leads downward into cynicism and nihilism. It's the path of refusing to engage with suffering, of allowing it to consume and define you. And the worst part is that it's a choice that compounds itself over time. The more you reject responsibility in the face of crisis, the weaker you become. The weaker you become, the more suffering dominates your existence. But there is another way. A person can take suffering as a signal, as something to be learned from. This requires something far more difficult than anger or withdrawal. It requires humility. It requires the admission that perhaps there is something they have ignored, something they need to change, something they must confront. This path is not easy. It demands effort, sacrifice, and an unwavering willingness to face the truth, even when that truth is painful. It forces a person to reevaluate their beliefs, their actions, their very identity. It often means letting go of the past, abandoning old ways of thinking, and stepping into the unknown. The choice is real, and it's one that everyone will face at some point. No one escapes suffering, but not everyone responds to it in the same way. Some let it destroy them. Others use it as a catalyst for profound transformation. Chaos is unsettling because it dismantles everything familiar. People build their lives around a sense of predictability, believing that they understand the rules, that their plans will unfold as expected, that they are in control. But then chaos erupts through loss, failure, betrayal, illness, and suddenly that sense of order vanishes. It is in these moments when the structure collapses that a person is forced to confront something deeper. The old way of being no longer works, and they are left standing in the wreckage, unsure of what comes next. At first, the natural reaction is to recoil. Chaos feels like an enemy, an unjust force that strips away comfort and security. It is terrifying because it exposes vulnerability, revealing just how fragile a person's existence truly is. But if they are willing to look beyond the fear, they begin to see something else, the possibility of meaning. Because within chaos, there is potential for growth, for renewal, for the creation of something new. This is an ancient idea deeply embedded in religious and mythological traditions. In many creation stories, order does not emerge from peace, it emerges from chaos. The process of transformation is not gentle, it is often violent, painful, and deeply unsettling. But within that process, there is the possibility of something greater than what existed before. It is the same principle that applies in personal suffering. The very thing that shatters a person's life can also be the thing that forces them to become stronger, more aware, more disciplined, more connected to what truly matters. This is why suffering, for all its horror, has the potential to be redemptive. It tears away illusions, leaving only what is real. It forces a confrontation with truth, with responsibility, with the necessity of change. And if a person is willing to face that honestly, they begin to see a path forward, not the same path they were on before, but something new, something more aligned with what is true. That is where meaning is found, not in avoiding suffering, not in pretending that life is easy, but in the decision to face the chaos head on. It is in those moments when everything seems lost that a person discovers what truly matters. They see what is essential. They realize that even in suffering, even in the darkest moments, there is a voice calling them forward. And if they choose to listen, they find that what comes next is not just survival, but transformation. Thanks for watching.